Every empire swears they're not trying to take over the world, until suddenly, half the planet is paying taxes and calling it civilization. From tiny city-states to globe-spanning overlords, empires have leveled up through history like a strategy game with no quit button. And here's the kicker, those same playbooks are still running today, just with better Wi-Fi. So let's start at level 1. The city-state empire, the little guys who accidentally built half of civilization while just trying to survive Tuesday. Level 1. The city-state empire. Meet the people who stumbled into greatness while trying to figure out basic plumbing. These are your Athens, your early Rome, your Venice. The empire that swears they're just defending themselves while somehow ending up with half the Mediterranean. Athens, 5th century BCE. A bunch of philosophers and sailors look around and think, you know what would make democracy better? Making everyone else do it too. Before they know it, they've got 200 city-states paying tribute like some ancient subscription service. We're not conquering anyone, they insist. We're just forming defensive alliances, right? Defensive alliances where you pay us or mysterious naval accidents happen to your trade routes. These are your we're bringing civilization people. They'll build you roads and aqueducts while taking your gold and calling it cultural exchange. They genuinely believe they're doing everyone a favor by introducing proper governance and sanitation. Look, we taught you democracy. Yeah, while enslaving your neighbors and stealing your art. City-state empires don't want to rule the world. They just want everyone nearby to stop being so chaotic and maybe pay some taxes while they're at it. 147 Greek city-states ended up in the Athenian Empire. But hey, they got philosophy and theater out of it, so totally worth the tribute payments, right? The thing about accidental empires is they're just the warm-up act. Some civilizations actually plan this stuff. Level 2. The regional hegemon. Level 2 doesn't stumble into power. They systematically absorb everything within marching distance and call it manifest destiny. These are your early Romans, your Egyptian New Kingdom, your Persian Empire under Cyrus. They have actual conquest strategies and 5-year expansion plans. Rome, 3rd to 2nd century BCE. Roman generals don't just fight wars. They perfect the art of defensive conquest. Gaul attacks our ally? Time to conquer Gaul. Carthage exists threateningly? Time to salt the earth and make sure they never exist again. These people turned warfare into municipal engineering. Roman engineers build roads straight through your homeland like they're delivering mail. 15,000 miles of roads by the end. Not for tourism, for moving legions fast enough to crush rebellions before breakfast. They standardize currency, language, and legal systems. We're not destroying your culture. They explain while literally building Latin schools on top of your sacred groves. Egypt during the New Kingdom spends 500 years systematically conquering everything from Sudan to Syria. Pharaohs don't just claim divine authority over Egypt. They export the concept. Our God King is your God King now. You're welcome. They perfect tribute extraction, turning conquered territories into permanent ATM machines. These empires have professional armies, standardized administration, and bureaucrats who can tax a turnip. They don't want your stuff. They want your stuff, your land, your people, and your children speaking their language. Regional hegemons control anywhere from 1 to 5 million square kilometers. But some civilizations think bigger. Level 3. The continental juggernaut. Level 3 is where empires stop being polite and start getting continental. Why conquer regions when you can conquer continents? These are your peak Rome, your Tang Dynasty China, your Mongols before coffee was invented, your Islamic caliphates. They have intercontinental logistics and the organizational skills to make it work. Rome, 117 CE. Trajan looks at a map and decides the Mediterranean should be a Roman lake. 5 million square kilometers. Hadrian's Wall in Britain to the Euphrates River. They don't just conquer territories, they terraform them into Roman civilization. Aqueducts in Spain, amphitheaters in France, Roman law in Judea. When in Rome becomes literally everywhere. Tang Dynasty China, 618 to 907 CE. Chinese emperors don't just unify China. They make Korea, Vietnam, and Central Asia into Chinese cultural satellites. The Silk Road isn't just trade routes, it's a cultural superhighway pumping Chinese technology, art, and political ideas from Constantinople to Japan. They invent woodblock printing and spread it like cultural malware. The Umayyad Caliphate, 661 to 750 CE. Islamic armies explode out of Arabia like they're on deadline. Within a century, they control everything from Spain to Central Asia. 15 million square kilometers. That's 3 times the size of modern Europe. They're not just conquering, they're translating Aristotle, preserving Greek philosophy, and inventing algebra while European kingdoms are still figuring out basic arithmetic. Continental juggernauts don't just control territory. They create cultural zones where their language, religion, and legal systems become the foundation for centuries of civilization. But sometimes even continents aren't enough. Level 4. The Intercontinental Overlord. Level 4 is where empires get truly ridiculous. Why settle for one continent when you can collect them all like geographic trading cards? These are your British Empire at peak, your Spanish Empire during the Gold Rush, your Mongol Empire when Genghis Khan's grandkids were feeling ambitious. Spain, 16th to 17th centuries. Spanish conquistadors don't just discover the New World. They strip mine it. Hernán Cortés shows up in Mexico with 500 men and somehow dismantles the Aztec Empire. How? Disease, political alliances with indigenous enemies, and really good timing. Plus horses. Turns out horses are psychological warfare when nobody's ever seen one. Spanish ships pump 180 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver out of the Americas over 3 centuries. They don't just get rich, they accidentally cause inflation across Europe by flooding markets with precious metals. Global economics before they invented economics. We're spreading Christianity, they claim, while literally working people to death in silver mines. The British Empire, 1815 to 1914. British officials look at a world map and see business opportunities. They don't just control trade routes, they control the oceans. The sun never sets on the British Empire isn't poetry, it's logistics. 25% of global landmass, 412 million people. A perfect indirect rule. Find local elites willing to collaborate, give them titles and privileges, let them handle day-to-day oppression while British officials count money. India, the crown jewel. British officials don't just extract wealth, they deindustrialize a continent. India goes from producing 25% of global manufacturing to 2% under British rule. Textile workers in Bengal starve while cotton flows to Manchester mills. We're bringing civilization, while causing famines that kill millions through economic manipulation. Mongol Empire, 1206 to 1368. Genghis Khan and his descendants don't just conquer territory. They create the first global communication network, the largest contiguous empire in human history. 24 million square kilometers connecting Korea to Poland. They don't just destroy cities, they rebuild them as nodes in a continental trade system. Mongol officials' perfect religious tolerance as imperial policy. Don't care what gods you worship as long as you pay taxes and don't rebel. They create diplomatic immunity, international postal systems, and free trade zones. Modern globalization with horse-based logistics. But intercontinental overlords still think geographically. Some empires transcend geography entirely. Level 5. The global system, Level 5 is where empires stop being about territory and start being about controlling the entire framework of how human civilization operates. These aren't just big empires. They're meta-empires that determine how other empires function. The British Empire, 1815 to 1945. British officials don't just control territories, they control global finance, shipping, communication, and time itself. Greenwich Mean Time isn't just convenience, it's imperial coordination. When London says it's 3 p.m., every British colony synchronizes to London time. They control global currency through the gold standard. Other countries can have their own money, but it's ultimately denominated in British pounds backed by British gold reserves. Global commerce flows through British banks, British insurance companies, and British shipping lines. Free trade means free for British merchants to dominate global markets. The Royal Navy doesn't just protect British interests. It enforces global maritime law according to British interpretation. They patrol global shipping lanes like planetary police officers. Pay our tariffs or your cargo mysteriously disappears to pirates. Amazing how piracy always targets ships that don't cooperate with British trade policies. Modern American Empire, 1945 present. American officials perfect the art of informal empire. Why occupy countries when you can control global financial systems? The dollar becomes global reserve currency. Every country needs dollars for international trade, which means every country needs to play by American rules. American military bases in 80 countries aren't occupations. They're security guarantees. NATO isn't conquest, it's collective defense that happens to require buying American weapons and following American strategic priorities. We're not an empire, American officials insist. We're global democracy promotion, while staging coups against democratically elected governments that don't cooperate. Global system empires don't just control territory. They control the rules that all other territories operate under. They're not on the map. They are the map. Level 6, the civilization builder. Level 6 is where empires stop conquering existing civilizations and start creating entirely new ones from scratch. These aren't just political entities. They're cultural reconstruction projects that reshape how humans organize society itself. Chinese Empire, 221 BCE, 1912 CE. Chinese emperors don't just unify China, they invent the concept of China. Before the Qin dynasty, China was dozens of warring kingdoms with different languages, currencies, and writing systems. Chinese officials standardize everything. Writing, currency, measurements, even axle width so carts can use the same roads. They create the mandate of heaven, the idea that legitimate government requires moral authority, not just military power. For 2,000 years, Chinese civilization operates on the principle that emperors rule because they deserve it morally, and dynasties fall when they become corrupt. It's not just government, it's a philosophy of how power should work. The civil service examination system creates meritocracy based on Confucian classics. Want government power? Master Chinese literature and philosophy. This system influences Korea, Japan, and Vietnam for centuries. They're not just conquering, they're exporting an entire framework for how intelligent people should organize society. Roman Empire, 27 BCE, 476 CE, West, /1453 CE, East. Roman officials don't just conquer territories, they Romanize them. Roman law becomes the foundation for legal systems across Europe for the next 1,500 years. Roman engineering creates infrastructure that outlasts the empire itself. Roman Christianity becomes the organizational structure for medieval Europe. They perfect the concept of citizenship as something you can earn regardless of where you're born. Caracalla's edict in 212 CE grants Roman citizenship to every free person in the empire. Revolutionary concept. Political identity based on participation in civilization rather than ethnicity or geography. Latin becomes the language of education, law, and religion across Europe until the Renaissance. Roman architectural styles influence building design for 2,000 years. Roman military organization becomes the template for professional armies. They don't just build an empire, they build the infrastructure other empires will use. But civilization builders still work within existing frameworks. The final level transcends frameworks entirely. Level 7. The Reality Shapers. Level 7 is where empires don't just change history, they change what humans think history means. These aren't just big civilizations. They're civilizations that redefine what civilization itself should look like for all future human development. Alexander's Empire, 336 to 323 BCE. Alexander doesn't just conquer the known world. He fuses Greek and Persian civilization into something entirely new. Hellenistic culture spreads from Egypt to India, creating hybrid civilizations that combine Greek philosophy, Persian administration, Egyptian mysticism, and Indian mathematics. Alexandria becomes the global center of learning for 700 years. The Library of Alexandria isn't just books. It's the attempt to collect all human knowledge in one place. Greek becomes the international language of scholarship from Rome to Bactria. Alexander's generals create kingdoms that last centuries, but more importantly, they create the template for cultural fusion as imperial strategy. Islamic Empire, 632–1258 CE. Islamic leaders don't just spread religion. They create the first truly global civilization that transcends ethnic and geographic boundaries. House of Wisdom in Baghdad becomes the center of global scholarship, preserving and expanding Greek philosophy, Persian science, Indian mathematics, and Chinese technology. Islamic scholars invent algebra, chemistry, and experimental scientific method. They create global banking systems with checks and credit that work from Spain to India. Islamic law creates international commercial standards. Arabic becomes the language of science, mathematics, and philosophy across Africa, Asia, and Europe. They don't just build an empire, they build the intellectual infrastructure of human advancement. European Renaissance? That's Islamic scholarship filtered through Spanish translation schools. Scientific revolution? Based on Islamic experimental methods. Global trade? Islamic banking and legal frameworks. The Mongol-Yuan synthesis, 1260 to 1368. Mongol rulers don't just conquer China. They create the first truly global empire that systematically connects Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas through trade, communication, and technology transfer. Under Mongol rule, ideas flow between civilizations faster than ever before. Chinese printing technology reaches Europe. Islamic astronomy influences Chinese calendars. European merchants travel to Chinese courts. The first global postal system connects Lisbon to Beijing. They create the template for global civilization based on technology transfer rather than cultural supremacy. Every level is still operational. City-states like Singapore and Dubai creating economic empires. Regional hegemons like Russia and China absorbing neighbors. Continental juggernauts like the EU standardizing entire continents. Intercontinental overlords like America controlling global systems. Civilization builders like China exporting development models. Reality shapers like Silicon Valley tech companies redefining how humans interact with reality itself. Current results. English is spoken by 1.5 billion people across 6 continents. Roman legal principles still govern European courts. Chinese inventions power modern technology. Islamic mathematical concepts underlie global finance. Mongol trade routes became modern supply chains. Every type of empire feeds the others. City-states perfect governance models. Regional hegemons test expansion strategies. Continental juggernauts develop administrative systems. Intercontinental overlords create global frameworks. Civilization builders export cultural templates. Reality shapers redefine what civilization means. So here's the assignment. Which type of empire does your country most resemble today? Drop your nation plus the level in the comments. We'll pin the most accurate examples and probably do a whole series on how modern nations inherited specific imperial strategies. Because here's the thing about human civilization, we didn't invent empire building, but we definitely perfected the distribution system. Every smartphone connects you to supply chains that span the globe like digital silk roads. Every social media platform operates like a cultural empire, standardizing how billions of people communicate. Subscribe if you want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Trust me, we're just getting started. Next week, how modern corporations use imperial strategies without armies, and why your favorite tech company thinks like a medieval dynasty. The empire never ended. It just got better Wi-Fi.